After how much I enjoyed the Neptunia series, I was eager to see what the folks over at Idea Factory were planning next. Expecting it to be Net 5, I was instead greeted by this odd title. Even from the initial teasers I could see Dragonstar VARNIR was going to be a very different beast. We were going from the reference-heavy comedic adventures with Neptune to a cold, deathly story about witches trapped in a living hell, where even as a child they're stuck between choosing losing their minds, having a dragon burst from them, like a scene in Alien, or to be slain by an elite order sent to hunt every last one of them down. This was a dark side of Idea Factory creeping in, one that I was definitely intrigued by. So join me as I share my thoughts on the entirety of Dragonstar VARNIR. Heavy spoiler warnings. The prologue of the game introduces the horror of the world quite swiftly, albeit bluntly. Alongside humanity are witches who gain their magical powers from a minuscule dragon resting within them. These dragons are constantly decaying the sanity of the witches, making it all too easy for them to succumb to madness. However, they do have a countermeasure. If they feed the dragon through drinking the blood of one, the dragons stop eating at the mind, but even this has a risky consequence. The dragon grows every time it is fed, eventually reaching a point where it has to escape the space it's trapped within, thus exploding out, killing the witch instantly as a new dragon takes to the skies. You can sense this deep fear amongst all witches. Each handle it in their own different way. Some hide away to ensure they don't hurt anyone. Some live off the madness so they don't die. Some end their own life. But you won't meet a single witch who isn't at least unnerved by the hand of fate given of them. On top of this, they are also hunted by an elite army known as the Order of Requiem. This is where we meet our protagonist, Zephy, a lackey to the army and evidently brainwashed by the militant ideals and hatred for the witches, blaming them for any and all destruction brought on by the dragons. Zephy is accidentally splits from his group and attacked by a dragon that nearly kills him if it wasn't for a passing witch seeing it as an opportunity to use it as a bargaining tool to retrieve a friend of hers captured by the Order. Minessa, the white-haired witch, gives up some dragon blood in hopes of saving him, inadvertently making him into a witch himself. Zephy now has to work with the witches to survive, as all he is now is a target for the Order. And that is just the introduction of Dragonstar VARNIR, and this is just the start of an ultimately bloodthirsty adventure across the region to learn more of the witches and their struggles of their own life. The struggles of protecting and caring for child witches living only knowing fear, and finally to attempt to find some way, any way of escaping this diabolical fate. Gotta admit, I was hooked. A lot is explained to you very quickly at the start, but I was fascinated by this troubled and dark world. This feeling of helplessness that created by this opening is a feeling that never truly goes away through the exploration and story of the world. Even in an optimistic moment, it feels like the weight is on the back of your mind, especially as everything I've explained is evident in the gameplay as well. The balance between becoming a dragon and falling to madness is something you yourself have to deal with at every second of the game, performing certain attacks, falling in battle, making questionable decisions, or failing to aid other witches drastically affects the direction of the story and ultimately the ending. The madness scale being at the core of this. If the scale is sitting unbalanced, or has a purple liquid filling up within it, you are being warned of the death impending. You have to work to manage this throughout the entire adventure, and it never stops being stressful when something unexpected happens and ends up having an effect on the scale. This is both its biggest selling point and its biggest turn-off. This game will stress you out quite a lot because of its pressure of making a miserable ending for being careless. Yet at the same time, it makes the situation far more believable when you inevitably encounter those who fail to maintain the balance one way or another. Despite another witch called Karikaro adamantly disagreeing with Minessa's plan to use Zephy, the two witches do indeed track the Order down and attempt to bargain with them. The plan almost fails, but as the Order intended to kill Zephy anyway, but in the chaos of an unexpected dragon attack, the witches free their imprisoned friends Lapinette and escape, heading back home to the witches' den. Zephy has nowhere else to go, so tags along and aids the witches any way he can. He is kinda naive, but to be fair, his whole life just got flipped upside down. Speaking of the witches, let's talk about them so far. Zephy is a decent protagonist. He starts out kind of annoying, refusing to adjust from his belief working with the Order and not really trusting any of the witches, but at the same time this doesn't take too long to break down. Once he sees how emotional and, well, human they all are, he soon decides to help them any way he can and cast aside his past as a member of the Order, even if elements of it continue to haunt him. He does eventually treat the witches as family, and to be honest, I know I'm jumping the gun a little here, but all the witches living at the witches' den are well written and downright lovely, so I can see why he eventually saw them as family. My first impression the first impression you're also likely to have on Minessa, the white-haired witch, is that she's crafty. At the end of the day, she planned on using Zephy to get her friend back, nothing more. But in reality, she just wants the people she cares about to be safe. Although she is often criticised for being overprotective, she does do everything in her power to do the right thing while keeping people safe. She often gets stuck in her own thoughts and as if her head is racing 24/7, but I think that just made her more relatable. I really do like Minessa. Kerikaru may be the oldest, but I'd still say Minessa's the leader. Kerikaru doesn't take any prisoners with anyone about anything, and is very open to Zephy, and another character I'll get to later on, about how she'd rather them just be dead than a burden. Although she warms up to him as time goes on, her fierce attitude towards life as a whole never really changes. Heck, I don't think I've ever heard a character talk about killing as much as she does and still be as sane as she is. Lepinette's a bit of an oddball. She certainly is the quiet type who'd rather sit under the stars, but her reasoning for being so closed off is kinda justified. Any human or witch she touches gives her a vision of how they will die. And any dragon she touches shows her who it used to be. She doesn't get to choose when she sees this, and only sees this as a curse because of it. She knows how all her friends will die after all. Zephy proposes that fate is not set and can be changed, so knowing how someone could die should be taken as a blessing. Her hesitation towards the optimism tells you a lot. I didn't spend that much time getting to know her like some of the other characters, but she was definitely one of the most interesting. But I will criticise that her importance in the story for a lot of the adventure is questionably worthwhile. If she wasn't a part of the story, not much would change until like the final act or so. But, back with the story. Back at the den, we're introduced to the rest of the family. 3 young children greeted them called Mine, Shikita and Pio. All of them having their own charm, humour and worries of their lives that they are witches too. A 4th child eventually arrives in a panic. She is called Feria. But before any real introductions can be made, Feria alerts the older witches that in fact the 5th and final child, Ruruta, has hid herself in a nearby sanctuary cave after feeling something move in her stomach and refusing to eat anymore. Zephy, Minessa, Kerikaru and Lepinette head out to find her before the worst case scenario comes to be. I won't show you the scene that follows finding her, because the team are mere seconds too late and we witness a child that at most is around 8 get brutally and unforgivingly murdered by the dragon within escaping through her stomach, only showing the sheer horror of the faces of those who witnessed it. I'm not a parent myself, but this moment still rattled me. This child screams for help mere moments before her blood covers the walls. Made worse by this is an unknown witch who could have maybe done something to delay this, sat and watched, then mocked the witches for their failure to protect Ruruta. This seemingly heartless witch is called Charlotta, and she claims to be the Witch of Hellfire, a name given to a witch a decade ago who lost herself to madness and burned over 100 witches to death in an event now referred to as the Carnival of Death. Charlotta is a very cold-hearted, and I did initially detest her. I get that's the point, but still. Minessa, being the sole survivor of this event, immediately calls out Charlotta of knowing she can't possibly be the Witch of Hellfire due to looking so different from behind. The Witch of Hellfire looked much bigger. Charlotta then proceeds to suggest a way of actually escaping the grim fate Ruruta just suffered. She claims that 3 great temples across the land hold the key to breaking the curse and letting the witches finally live in peace. Despite being skeptical and understandably not trusting her, Charlotta forces herself into the group anyways as she ultimately wants to find this key as well, pushing us to her 5 party members to use in battle. Dragon-style VARNIR is a JRPG, so battling consists of turn-based combat where your team of 3 at a time take turns fighting against whatever opposition you encounter, making sure you're well prepared with equipment and items, and exploiting weaknesses to dispatch with foes quicker. What makes DSV stand out with its combat, however, are a few key features. Firstly is devouring. The closer a dragon enemy is to death, the higher chance of a witch being able to devour them if selected. Devouring enemies gives you access to their skill grid where you can pick and choose what abilities you'd like to inherit, as well as stat boosts to help give you a new edge in combat. Think of the blue mages in Final Fantasy, but everyone has access to it and it's a lot more fun. To become more powerful, you'll need to devour a lot of dragons. Every time a new dragon is encountered, your first thought should always be who's getting it. If it has a little tick next to them, then when you go to devour them, then whoever's already been taken in the past and nothing new can be inherited from them. During the flow of battle, a meter will fill up next to the character's health. Once that's full, it will enter a dragonic state where they become far more powerful. However, entering this at low health makes the chance of an even more powerful form emerging. However, this affects the madness scale, so I never used it willingly. The added stress placed on the player for using it is more than enough reason to not, which is a shame and a fair criticism because they are pretty cool, but the game actively discourages you from doing this because you could be tipping someone over the edge, risking a far worse ending for them or in general. To such an extent that it would immediately reload my save if I happen to activate this powerful form, since it's ultimately random when it triggers and the chance stacks higher against you the closer you are to death. Since the witches can fly, you can freely shift between 3 heights of combat for different advantages and disadvantages, such as maybe placing a trap above an enemy, but risking a greater fall if they happen to strike you down to the ground. It's creative and definitely enjoyable, although I must admit I didn't use this feature that much and I still got through the game without too much trouble. It is a difficult game, however. I played it through on normal and still found myself getting a couple game overs before I reached the end of my adventure. Speaking of trouble though, the 5 witches eventually head out to the first temple where we're introduced to a mechanic that, although well handled and has a good payoff, is the least enjoyable thing about this game for me. Faria can look after herself being the oldest sibling, but the other 3 kids cannot. You yourself have to feed them to make sure they do not fall to madness. However, you feed them too much, well, the dragon is going to consistently grow. So you're not just managing the madness scale, but you're now a full-time carer to 3 kids, where the price for taking too long or just failing to feed them is that they will die horrifically like Raruta did. And the game even warns you about this. If they become dragons, they will show up and fight you, so you'd have to kill their dragons. If you're going to play this game, have several save files going, and make sure you have them go really far back in case of the worst, and ultimately have at least one save at the end of chapter 3, since that's the very last time you can save before the child saver time limit begins. You have to get all the way to the start of chapter 11 to stop the clock. If you're anything like me, the thought of those children dying and it being my fault was not something I was prepared to have sit on my conscience, video game or not. Of course, this family man life is entirely optional. You don't have to try and help them. Maybe just when you see them become dragons, that ice cold heart of yours might just start to melt. And that's the biggest thing. I do enjoy a game placing some stress on the player from time to time. But this, to me, is slightly too much. It could easily be a turn off. After every save point, I was leaving wherever I was to check on the kids. After every story beat, I was going back to the den to check on the kids. If I happened to stumble into an effective source of good food, I'd milk it dry. Looking after Monet, Chiquita and Pio like they were my own was always the top priority. I guess it was good real life training on parenting, but this invisible time limit just always had me on edge. Which is a shame, because the other activity in the den is so much fun! You can visit Manessa, Caricaro, Lapinette, Charlotta, and eventually Faria's room at any point to spend time with them. Get to know them, maybe give them a few gifts, and even romance one of them if your heart so desires, with the obvious exception being Faria. And this was great, a little cheesy at times, but it was good wholesome fun watching Zephy and Manessa slowly fall in love because I only really visited her. I hesitate to say she is the best girl, as all of them are amazing to get to know, but she was the one I resonated with, don't judge. But at the same time, learning so many little details about Manessa, she began to trust Zephy more and more, just made me want to continue, even if the others make the odd joke about it as the relationship developed. Moving on, the team find and search out the first temple. They leave it practically empty-handed. On their return, they bump into an informant that alerts them that a band of outlaws called the Ravens are currently fighting the Order, seemingly to the death. You could have been introduced to the Ravens sooner than this, but they weren't relevant enough to the plot that they justified being brought up. Now they are. The Ravens are led by a suspicious lady just referred to as the Ruby Eye. Just imagine the character Cinder from the web show Ruby, but if she was interesting. Ruby Eye's real identity, at least to me, seemed a little obvious, but I'll get to that later. Her main subordinates are the infamous Dragon Killer and a deceptive skinny guy, you know, usual pairings. The Ravens are making a device that allows them to control dragons. Lapinette unknowingly starts wearing a bracelet that houses the device that a dragon had dropped, and before long attempts to kill Zephy under the influence. After escaping, they bump into the commander of the Order, Corbera. She offers Zephy a loan to rejoin the Order and betray the witches, giving away their location. Zephy at first is uncertain of what to do, but my half an hour of cutscenes, fix that real quick. Okay, that is another point worth bringing up. The story may be fascinating, but sometimes you do sit through up to an hour straight of just cutscenes and talking. It reminds me of the awfully long codec calls from MGS2. Now, I don't mind this usually. I love sitting back and absorbing the world and character building. I wouldn't be a JRPG fan if I didn't. The problem originates from the previously mentioned Little Sisters. Sitting through long cutscenes does start to make you feel a little uneasy, because before long, like an overprotective parent, you want to check on them. and a lot of the time I'd be coming back to see them be unhappy or slightly uncomfortable, meaning I now had to act quickly to do something to stop anything bad happening to them, limit the damage kind of thing. You can't have the player be on a life-ending time limit, then get them to sit through really long cutscenes. I found myself reading text before the character spoke far more often than in this than in any other game I can think of because of how conscious I was of the time limit, and I've played and beaten Persona 4 more times than I care to admit. But I'm complaining a lot for a game that I really love, so let's carry on. During this long talk, Karikaru opens up to Zephy about her concerns as of late. She can feel the dragon within her's heartbeat, and as she's older than the average survival age of a witch, she knows her time soon may be up. Zephy promises no matter what, they will find a way to lift the curse. The team then venture off towards the second temple towards the south. They have a bit more trouble this time as the temple guardian leaves just before they can fight it. What's a guardian, I hear you ask? Well, it's kind of the video game 101 enemy. The important door to plot won't open unless it's dead. The first one, the temple, just took its punishment like a soldier, but this one flies off. So the team follow it to a nearby forest, venture into a nearby town, very conveniently giving me the chance to buy a necklace for Minessa to continue the romance route. So, you know, small victories and all that. Then return to the forest one more time, just for the guardian to then go back to the temple. Starting to think the guardian was being my wingman to get me an excuse to go to the town to get that necklace, because otherwise chasing it was 100% pointless. The game does this a few times, but not enough to be distracting. There are the odd filler moments where the gang go on a mini adventure that kills about 10 to 20 minutes before returning to the task at hand. But without meaning to bash on the same points, I'd like this more if I didn't have a doom clock on those kids ticking down in real time. When they kill and eat the second guardian, Karikaru doesn't eat in fear of feeding the dragon too much, but in turn accidentally uncovers a lie from Charlotta. You see, up until this point, Charlotta was telling them they had to eat the guardian to enter the final room, otherwise they would immediately go mad. But since Karikaru doesn't eat the guardian and doesn't go mad, Charlotta's lie is now in the open. When questioned, she reveals what's really going on. Brace yourself. The planet they're on is actually a planet-sized dragon called Dragonstar Varnir. The Dragonstar is now old and dying, no longer having the strength to allow new witches to be born. It's lost its strength after the Carnival of Death. Charlotta has been getting the witches to eat the guardians since they're far more intelligent, hoping that one of them would become worthy of becoming the new Dragonstar, basically becoming the restart switch. In a transfer between Dragonstars, the witches would be relieved of their curse and finally live in peace. The catch is, one of them would have to sacrifice themselves for this to happen. Minessa and Karikaru both claim they'll make the sacrifice, but Zephy shuts them down. But then, without really explaining herself, Charlotta claims it's impossible for Zephy to do so, and that's that. The team head back home after this revelation. I admit I did like the twist, especially as it was foreshadowed earlier on, as in the sanctuary cave where Raruta was found has a ginormous skeleton lingering around inside it, with a strong witch magic radiating off of it, stopping anyone who isn't a witch from passing by. The skeleton being someone who'd previously tried and failed to be a Dragonstar. The team eventually decided they will continue, but not before helping Zephy out a bit. Zephy is concerned about the Order searching for his old home back before he was a witch, so wanted to go check. He initially planned to go with the other witches, but the other witches, now accepting him as family, tag along. This is where our sixth and final party member joins the party, Faria. The oldest of the four living children, Faria, has been training constantly with Charlotta in their spare time and had become confident enough to join the fight. She's a little bit of a tsundere. For those who don't know what I mean, she pretends to not be interested in things and that she doesn't care, and is rarely honest with her feelings. She is actually very accepting of Zephy from very early on in the story, but only now in this moment in the plot does she admit it. That's kind of what I mean. She's adorable though. Knowing she's the oldest of the children, she wants to lead by example and get strong. But she's under the impression she can just physically train all the time and make the difference. And although she claims to be independent, she's not. Even remotely. She's very reliant on everyone else for a good while. She fits in this oddball team quite nicely. When they find Zephy's old home, it's quite clear it's been raided. If it isn't broken, it's certainly not worth having anymore. The only thing remaining is an old map Zephy's mother drew when she was alive, was one of the only things left untouched. Zephy mentions that this mother told him if he's ever in danger to go to the places on the map. The witches alarm Zephy that the map actually goes to the witches' den, proposing the question, why did his mother know about them, and why go to them if they're seen as the enemy to the rest of the world? To be honest, even if a couple of the twists are kind of obvious when you look at them, I really enjoyed the journey and discovery as the adventure continues. Zephy's home then gets raided again, but this time, as a coincidence felt like having a fun day, They take the map back to the Empire. The gang chase through a secret passageway to stop the map ending up in the commander's hands. When the map makes it to the Empire's capital building, a diary belonging to Zephy's mother is also retrieved along with the map, after taking it from one of the officials there. The official not only gives up the map, but alerts them to a secret escape passage out to get out. Back outside and taking care of another dragon, the diary uncovers a few things, just not all at once. The first and only revelation taken from it is Zephy's mother was indeed a witch, but later on Zephy realises that the dragon he saw as a very small child, who he believed took both his parents' lives, well, the dragon had to come from somewhere and was most likely his mother. He takes this new information surprisingly well, but I think this might be because I've been working my arse off keeping that madness scale down so everyone would be calm. The madness scale isn't just something that affects the ending, it affects the entire direction of the story as well. Zephy would act far more hostile towards this new information if some of his sanity was missing. Which I like, it does add replay value to see how the story could go if you're not careful enough. On the way home, the informant alerts Charlotta that she is needed in a certain location. She heads off to face this alone, with the party following from a hidden away safe distance. Ruby Eye had summoned her to threaten her to not talk to the Ravens about her, due to their suspicions of her being a witch. When Minessa spots Ruby Eye, we get another twist which, like I said earlier, very easy to see this one coming. Minessa's severe PTSD is triggered as she immediately recognises that Ruby Eye is the real witch of Hellfire. The one who burned over 100 witches to death that Minessa witnessed as a small child. Minessa freaks out and eventually has a mental shutdown, unable to cope. Ruby Eye confirms that she is indeed the Hellfire Witch and her real name is Bendika. Bendika leaves after her threats. Charlotta is actually a little shaken by it. The cold, sassy, kind of bitchy and very flirtatious witch suddenly got quiet. She decides to herself to go to the forest special to her, the most dangerous monster-infested forest in the damn game, fittingly called the Forest of Death. Charlotta planned to go alone, assuming the gang still don't like her, but despite all the lies she's made and problems she's caused, everyone helps her go to the special place for her, the place in question being a lone grave. Charlotta finally opens up to the group who she really is, and why this grave is over 100 years old and still significant to her. Charlotta is 200 years old. Despite her youthful looks, she's a witch VARNIR created to find the next dragon star. After 200 years, she's so distant and determined not to make connections because she doesn't want to care for someone who will die before her. So didn't. Only one time was that broken when 100 years ago, a witch named Finay did everything in her power to care for her, making a friendship and ultimately defending her. When Charlotta failed to find someone who could be the new dragon star, she left and faked her own death for another few decades before trying again. But to Finay this mattered, so she had a funeral for Charlotta, with her gravestone still existing today. When Charlotta returned a few decades later, Finay was dead, executed by her fellow witches for falling in love with a human, something considered taboo 100 years ago. Interestingly, this kind of sparked the reason why witches are so hated now. Finay's lover was in quite a powerful position, so changed the history books to only show witches as villains, in turn explaining the undying and misunderstood hatred for all witches that I'd kind of been curious about from the word go. Although it's a little bit of a stretch, I could buy this actually happening in a world without easy to access news outlets. I felt it was an understandable way of explaining the world the way it is. I could kind of sympathise with this lover, even if he acted kind of extreme. When Charlotta found out about this, she wanted to bury Finay respectfully somewhere where no one would find and potentially defile the grave. She chose the Forest of Death. Yeah, I no longer detested Charlotta at this point. In fact, I'd probably say she's the second best character in the game in terms of her writing, character and development. Minessa stands at the top for me, but that's just bias talking now, and I'm prepared to admit that. Fun fact, if you optionally spend time or attempt to romance Charlotta, you can actually learn of her immortality sooner, but she only trusts you with this information. In fact, this is how I actually learnt this twist. It wasn't her announcing it to everyone at the grave, it was through a one-to-one. Her very philosophical talk about the curse and never dying is what comes to those you love. And this isn't the only example. Everyone has little secrets of their own that you can learn sooner than others, or learn at all, and I really love that. It made the whole cast feel far more human, that you could spend time with them and eventually learn a thing or few of them as they go through to trust you. Actually, while I'm on the subject, I haven't had a cast of characters this likeable in years, and I mean that. All of the main 6 are enjoyable, smartly written characters who believably develop over the course of the story. Minessa learns to not be as overprotective, and that it's okay to just enjoy the emotions and have fun, kind of thing. Karikara at the start would much prefer never seeing Zephy and Charlotta ever again, even threatening them more than once. But when either of them are in danger, she was prepared to help and care for them, or anyone for that matter. She's a passionate cook, even if she sometimes cooks at night when she can't sleep. And when something actually makes her happy, she full-on belly laughs. You can't not love that. Lapinette is innocent on the surface, but has evidently been through a lot. She's confident enough to admit when she's scared, but at the same time does scare easily. In fact, in early games, she's constantly wary of Zephy because she's only ever been around women. So she doesn't know what to do when there's suddenly some doofus bloke around trying to help whenever he could. Yet next to Minessa, she probably gives Zephy the most time to breathe, always hearing him out and engaging him on what others may not bother. She holds a lot of emotional baggage, and it eventually kind of explodes out as it goes on, but I can relate to her pretty hard. I like Lapinette as well. Charlotta might be the defrosting Ice Queen story, but it's done right. She grows to care, not because she's used to anyone not caring about her, which they do anyway, but instead because they force themselves into her life, with Faria being the leading example of this. Charlotta agreed to train Faria, and throughout this, Faria looks up to Charlotta as a role model. Even early on, you can catch Charlotta getting into it a bit of a parent mode with Faria, despite claiming she doesn't care. I will highlight though that Charlotta feels like the girl the writers wanted you to romance. She is the most flirtatious and arguably goes through the biggest development when you get to know her. I know on my next playthrough I'll definitely be getting Zephy and Charlotta hooked up instead of with Minessa. Lastly, Faria I felt for because she has a lot of pressure on her soldiers now she's the oldest of the children, but despite her many stumbles along the way, she does find her footing and become a very charming, funny final member. And even the other kids, Monet, Chiquita and Pio, for as much as feeding them was a pain in the backside, they were lovely, that it gave me a reason to carry on trying to keep them healthy. They were worth it in my book, Monet being incredibly ditzy in referring to herself in the third person, but only ever really wanting cuddles and company. Chiquita always trying to be the cool one, pretending she's not interested, often a little rude, but ultimately in a completely harmless way. You'll know what I mean if you ever met a child like her. And Pio being shy, but pretty smart. She's definitely the most intelligent of the three, but also worries about the bigger witch's safety. When the gang get back home, they decide they'll head for the third and final temple the following day, but not before having one wholesome moment that was definitely worth highlighting. The sleepover. Charlotta, now feeling far more accepted into the group, decides for the first time to stay for dinner, even helping Karikaro with her cooking. During a quiet moment between Charlotta and Zephy, she admits that she actually had her eye on him for a while, knowing about the witch blood within him before he awoke, and originally wanting to try and make him the Dragon Star. But as she got to know him, she felt guilty of this and is now telling him. Zephy smiles and actually thanks her for telling him. After eating, Charlotta gets tired since because she's immortal, she hasn't eaten in a very long time, so is kind of tuckered out after having a big meal. The kids ask if they can spend the night with her, to which she actually accepts. The kids then slowly but surely kind of abduct each of the big witches, going from Zephy to Minessa to Karikaro, Lapinette and Faria, to have them all in the same room to share a bed. They have a big old-fashioned sleepover for all the dark and miserable events going on in this adventure. Keeping everyone insane and alive gave the reward of the most sweet, light-hearted and heartwarming moments in the game. All of them just get to be a family. The kids get to be kids for once. Everyone's happy. I loved this. This light and goofy moment felt really well earned after everything not only the characters had gone through, but the player as well. For as much as I criticised the madness scale and keeping the little sister's health in check, the reward for doing so is just like this absolutely loving scene that just made it so worth it. But before I move on to the end game, I want to shift gears for a second and talk about the graphics and soundtrack. For an anime-styled game, just like Neptunia V2R, the game is beautiful and full of life. The characters animate super smoothly, with not just moving, breathing and lip-syncing, but smaller details like water reacting to their clothes, tears sparkling in the light. It's amazing to see it visually be pretty high standard for an art style that hasn't really grown that much in years. The scenery, except maybe the deserts, are gorgeous, and the lighting does its job to help expose this. The soundtrack is a bit more mixed than normal. They definitely had a different kind of theme in mind with the contrast to the Neptunia series. Although there are certainly some real good highlights I've come to expect from Idea at this point, some of the tracks do bend into each other as well, making a nice but selectively remarkable soundtrack.
Show me your power. Wither away. That will work. Disappear.
Why? That's so messed up.
My turn.
But let's wrap up this story, shall we? The third and final temple is huge, understandably being as important as it is, and certainly does its job at testing the player as almost all the enemies are ruthless. The Guardian at the end waiting for them. Unfortunately, it isn't that simple. Lapanet senses that the Guardian Dragon was once the witch that was Zephy's mother. Zephy manages to keep a hold of himself despite the clearly stressful situation, mercy killing the dragon for the sake of his mother. The second in command of the Ravens arrives demanding the location of Bendika, now knowing she is a witch and feeling betrayed. This doesn't go very far though, as Bendika is also there and kills the man in mere seconds, burning him into nothing but ashes. You know, just in case you had any doubts about her being the real witch of Hellfire. She warns them that the Order of Requiem is on its way to, and oddly leaves without a fight. You may have noticed I never once named either of the main two lackeys as the Ravens. That's because of how much they're hyped up. They are not really worth the time. One dies off screen and the other's killed in a cutscene. Neither are actually fought, which makes me kind of wonder why so much effort was placed into designing them if they were going to just die without getting to do anything. When they return home, Charlotta tells them what to do next. To the Sanctuary Cave again, the cave Ruta died in at the start of the adventure. Before they get there, they bump into Commander Corbera one more time. She tells them that the Emperor of the Order has died, taking his own life after going insane. The 90-something-year-old hung himself. Before he did though, he told his Cardinal, "Our faith was built upon lies." Corbera directly blamed Zephy and now wants him dead, big time. Well, she already kinda did, but now she's a lot angry about it. After a long battle, we finally defeat her, just in time for the Cardinal to arrive to tell us that the Empire will now stop hunting the witches after the discovery of their real history. They had translated Zephy's mother's book before the witches took it and are aware of the truth. Now the Emperor is dead and the law has changed, meaning the Order of Requiem are leaving them alone. And the Ravens, well, with their leader now confirmed a witch, they destroyed the dragon controlling productions, not before a Raven manages to steal one of the bracelet to give to Bendika, who is now dead-heading towards the Sanctuary Cave. Back home, the informant's now out of a job with the Order and Ravens now being out the picture, so Slight decides to retire, but not before showing an interest in the efforts of the three little sisters had put into Zephy's mother's book themselves, eventually discovering together that there is actually a way to stop the dragon growing. In the excitement of this discovery, they rush off chasing after the main witches to try and let them know of this information. Meanwhile, at the cave, the witches bump into Bendika one more time, who finally reveals why she killed those witches. She was someone Charlotta had previously tried to make a dragon star. But when she discovered the truth, she panicked, thinking the witches were doomed to die hunted, die a dragon, or die insane. So she acted the way she did, believing it would be better than watching them suffer. She killed over 100 witches, believing it was a mercy killing, something that, in retrospect, is brought up a lot in this game. Mercy killing is like the first thought a lot of people seem to have in this world. Charlotta shares the whole truth with her about there actually being a way to stop the curse. The little sisters arrive with their new knowledge, and Bendika actually stops for a second and realises she was wrong. Name one other villain who's actually done that when they were told they were wrong. I'll wait. But this only happens if the kids were kept alive, which is a point worth criticising a little. If you're going for the true ending, you never get a climactic fight with any of the villains except Commander Corbera. The Cardinal leaves you alone, the Emperor hung himself, Bendika is redeemed a little thanks to her power of adorable children, and both her underlings who only fight you in cutscenes before they die. I mean, of course this can change drastically if the madness scale is higher, but if you're going for the true ending, you miss out on a few interesting fights. Bendika breaks the bracelet, knowing it will likely cause all the dragons she was controlling to riot, and pushes everyone out and leaves. Now the little sisters are directly with us and we can enter the holy cave. Now that the little sisters are with us, just want to bring emphasis to that sentence, we can finally stop being their bloody babysitters. If you've got here and no one died, congratulations, you've got past the time limit and you can finally play this JRPG your way again. So I immediately went back and explored every corner of every area, doing as many side quests along the way, and to be honest, it felt odd. No longer needing to rush around, I could finally relax. Eventually the Holy Caves brings us to the true final dungeon, the Star's Womb. The music became amazing yet incredibly ominous. The tension starts to raise as the crew have yet to find any other way of removing their curse that doesn't involve one of them sacrificing themselves. The dungeon is also easily the longest in the game, building up the finale excellently. Along the way, Charlotta mentions that she actually saved one and only one witch from the cardinal death, from the sheer courage that she had to protect those around her despite being a child. The witch saved was Minessa. When you finally get to the bottom, another twist is dropped. One that did genuinely actually catch me by surprise. Bendika survived the fight with all those dragons and forced herself to become the next Dragon Star in front of the whole party. She's not doing it for any evil purpose either, she's doing it to amend her mistakes, and she accepted, but that leaves just one hurdle. Before Dragon Star Bendika can now step in to protect the new world, the old must bow out. You are teleported to God knows where, in the middle of space, surrounded by meteorites and planet like something straight out of the better Final Fantasy games. The music becomes straight up legendary, and the final boss begins. You have to take down Dragon Star VARNIR. Hell yes! The fight is brutal, but once you pull through, Bendika becomes the new Dragon Star. The curse is finally lifted. The witches get to live their lives in peace. Charlotta unfortunately doesn't get to go with them. Being created by VARNIR, she leaves with a heartfelt goodbye. The team return home, triumphant, ending the story. This really is one of those experience it yourself kind of games. It has its issues, but man is it beautiful. I truly adore the entire cast, the dungeons, the enemies, the stories, the music, everything. It's just beautiful. I think that's the best word to describe it. It's beautiful. Plus, there's even the epilogues I almost forgot. There's a special post-credit scene focused on whoever you decide to romance in the game. So for me, we threw Manessa a surprise party out of love. You could probably hear me going, "Aww," from down the street, to be honest. Especially when Zephy and Manessa finally kissed under the moonlight. And then Manessa asked if that could be a normal thing, and I was just like, ah! The path to getting the true ending is something I will always unfortunately criticise. But my god, is this game something special. It has its stumbles, it has its missteps, but I'd be lying if I wasn't saying this is one of the best games I've played this year, and I've played Devil May Cry 5. Easily be one of, if not my game of the year. I hope more of this series comes in the future, because this cannot, under any circumstance, be the only time we get to see this truly legendary cast of characters. Please play this game if you have any kind of interest in this kind of style. If you have any interest in JRPGs at all, this game is worth your time. But this review's gone on long enough. If you've watched all of this, I very much appreciate you listening to my constant rampant ramblings as I've gone on through this, but I genuinely hold this game very close to my heart now, and I recommend you at least give it a try. But until next time, peace you guys.
You're very close to my heart, and I want you to always have a reason to smile.
You're close to mine too, Zephy. Today's party was lovely. But you give me a reason to smile every day by just being here.
Well...
Zephy, that kiss earlier, can we make that a normal thing too?
Of course.